Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is the 8th webinar in our Stay Connected weekly webinar series here at Aruba, a Hewlett-Packard enterprise company. If this is your first webinar in the Stay Connected series, thanks for joining. My name is Anthony. I'm the one managing the webinar program and hosting these webinars, and appreciate you taking the time to join us for today's topic. Today, it's the CARES Act for education and how to get the most of the funding your school system receives from the CARES Act. We kicked things off in this series 6 weeks ago with how your network can deliver business continuity to you and your employees. And since then, we've discussed everything from healthcare, and there was a previous presentation on education in K-12, virtual call centers, the retail industry, and businesses looking to improve their networking security with the increase in remote workers. Just generally how everyone's adapting to meet these new challenges that we're facing. We're joined today by Dan, Zeki, and Brett, all from Aruba, and I'll let them introduce themselves as they take you through today's topic. But before we get started, a few notes for those who are using our Bright Talk webinar platform for the first time, and a reminder for those of you who have been on with us before. There's a box underneath the slide window to submit your questions. It's Ask a Question. It's a little tab. And if you click that, you can submit your questions. We will be receiving or taking questions throughout the webinar, but we will be answering them in the order in which they were received at the end of the webinar. So I'll drop in a couple of reminder notes to be sure and ask your questions if something comes up, all the way until the end of the Q&A. If there are questions that we can't answer, we may need to reach out to a colleague here at Aruba or get some more information for you. I can always get you that answer directly using the email address you used to register. So that's the Ask a Question tab underneath the slide. We will also have some poll questions, which our presenters will introduce at different points in the presentation. You're going to be able to see those poll questions underneath the slide window as well, only when the polls are open. So they're not open yet. They'll be launched by the presenter. There are also some attachments to supporting content for today's presentation, as well as links to Aruba web pages that can help you as well. You'll find those in the Links and Attachments tab, aptly named, below that slide window. And of course, at the end, feedback. You'll be prompted to give a rating on a 1 to 5 star scale. Any and all ratings are greatly appreciated. We've modified our webinar presentations over the course of, 2 or 3 years. I know Dan's presented with us before. We've modified how we do these based on that feedback. So don't be shy. Let us know what you feel, and we will take that stars rating as well as an open comment box into any topics you might like to see in the future. So that's going to do it for my portion at the beginning here. I'm going to introduce Dan Rivera, who's our K-12 and E-rate manager here at Aruba, who's going to get things started. Thanks a lot, Dan.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining as we go through talking about the CARES Act for education and really what is happening, what kind of funding, what kind of programs are available to help you as we transition into response of the current pandemic. As we go forward, we're going to take a look at some of the challenges we're facing, of course, do a review of the CARES Act, specifically some of the educational funding within the CARES Act, and then there's been some proposed legislation we'll take a look at as well, what the industry is doing to respond to this current pandemic, and then the solutions that are available and the next steps that you can take within your own school. So as we get started, we are going to launch our first poll question, and really it comes down to, what is the most important challenge that you're facing within your organization right now? So is it going to be lack of devices? Is it lack of home connectivity for your students or your teachers? Maybe it's a lack of training for your teachers, professional development, the ability for everyone to transition away from that old way of teacher, textbook, paper, and pencil in classroom learning to this new 21st century learning of digital learning, remote and distance learning. So if you can take just a couple of seconds to identify what those challenges are, and then we'll continue on. I do see, thinking we do see live results coming in. So obviously we've seen industry step up with lack of devices and lack of home connectivity. In fact, we'll talk a little bit about how the FCC has encouraged service providers with Keeping Americans Connected, and it's an initiative they launched to really help incentivize service providers to offer free and reduced connectivity, whether it be Wi-Fi routers or school-connected Wi-Fi connected school buses and other types of connectivity offerings for the community. So we'll go ahead and let that go. Let's talk about some of the challenges that we're seeing come into play. Before COVID-19, before this current pandemic, we really saw some unique challenges happening. What were the top concerns in higher ed versus K-12, and certainly this should resonate with many of you here. You know, top priority for both higher ed and K-12 was all about information security. It's protecting the student data, the PII, the personal identifiable information, protecting the network against security hacks and breaches. We saw the Department of Justice, in combination with the FBI and the Department of Education last year, issue several private industry notifications to let schools across America know that their networks were under attack by known hacking communities. So that was absolutely a top priority. But within each of these, we saw how the need to change away from that paper textbook, teacher, and pencil to a more digital type of learning. And we're seeing that transformation, and unfortunately through this current pandemic, we've just seen an acceleration of the need for that. And this is obviously in coordination. We do these studies with COSIN, for example, in K-12, and EDUCAUSE for higher education. I'm going to go ahead and, I'll close that poll out as we look to what some of the challenges that are happening within both K-12 and higher ed. Certainly, we're seeing the challenge of access and support, and we saw that in our poll results. Access and support was, I believe, number one. And I apologize, Anthony. I think there we go. Lack of home connectivity. So lack of home connectivity.
55%, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had almost 40 responses. So yeah, perfect.
Thank you very much. So as you can see, certainly access and support is a challenge not only in your organization, but it really is what we're seeing nationwide, which is the need for devices and internet access at home, coupled with the proper support to help students start learning as quickly as possible. And certainly with the new teaching methodology that comes as everyone evolves into this new way of instruction, it requires a lot of professional development as well as other trainings. Not only the ability to how to take that learning and instruction and digitize it, but how to use the technology and tools to communicate that not just across the desk in the classroom, but literally through a computer into the students' homes. So really teachers are having to change how they think about their own instruction, their own class management, and successful content delivery. And then lastly, we see schools and colleges they really need to review their plans for classes and events that previously required large physical attendance, right? So close working areas such as working in the science lab or practicing or attending sporting events. Obviously, as we come up to the end of the school year, attending graduations, we need to take a look at a new approach for everything. So you'll see it in the headlines, what is happening within the schools today, what is what I would call the new reality. We've now moved to this new way of learning, making kids and teachers alike, students and teachers alike, have this new engagement through online learning and distance learning. So we see a major divide as it relates to what we call the digital divide. In fact, the FCC calls it the homework gap. And how do we close that? Because with this new pandemic, it really revealed that there is a large number of students that have zero connectivity outside of the school campus. So in order to address some of these challenges, as we've been forced to quickly adapt to this new way of learning, we've seen the industry and other government agencies respond. So we've seen the FCC take actions with that Keep Americans Connected pledge, where they're asking service providers to offer free or reduced connections and equipment. We're seeing that the FCC announced some gift rule orders. There's a new order around the gift rule, and it relaxed some of the rules within the E-rate program to allow service providers to offer free goods and services to schools and libraries that were having concerns with being able to connect students and teachers for this new way of distance learning. We also saw the FCC take action in relaxing some of the community use of that Wi-Fi for school campuses where they can open up their Wi-Fi to their surrounding community. And of course, we saw the FCC take additional action in expanding spectrum as it relates to connectivity. We saw many of the service providers offering free or loaner devices. We saw internet service and still continue to see that free or reduced cost internet service for students. And of course, those personal hotspots or the MiFi type of things. And really we've seen some very creative ways of extending that Wi-Fi through different sources. So we'll get into some of this, which is what we call drive-through internet connectivity, where schools have turned outdoor access points and aimed them into the parking lot or other accessible areas of their school campus so that parents and their students can come onto campus and still connect to the Wi-Fi throughout the day. We've seen where we've attached outdoor access points to mobile buses, so like a school bus or a city bus, and drive it into certain areas where they offer a day-long or half a day-long community Wi-Fi for students to be able to connect. And then we've also seen even private businesses open up their own Wi-Fi to allow community to come into a parking lot at a strip mall, for example, and to be able to connect that way. So we're seeing the industry take some great creative actions to respond to this, but do keep in mind these are all just temporary solutions. So everything that we're doing from drive-up Wi-Fi to school buses in a community area and others, it really is a temporary fix. So in order to create some additional long-term fixes, we're seeing the Congress, we're seeing the government take some legislative efforts to really try and help create some long-term solutions. So with that, I'd love to bring Zeki Berzinji in to share with us and talk about some of those efforts that are being made. So Zeki?
Hey, thanks, Dan, and good afternoon and good morning to everybody on the call. As Dan mentioned, my name is Zeki Berzinji. I serve as the State and Local Government Affairs Director for Hewlett Packard Enterprise, which is the parent company of Aruba. And my job over the past couple of weeks has been to really partner with governors and mayors and local school districts to make sure that when it comes to responding to COVID-19, we're positioning ourselves as a partner to really help close that digital divide, as Dan mentioned. And a big part of that is thinking of more creative, outside-of-the-box ways to invest in technology and infrastructure that will really help us weather not just the immediate storm, but also build up resilience, hopefully for years to come. And so I think that brings us to our specific conversation today on the CARES Act and other forms of federal funding. So I will do just a brief overview, and for a lot of you, this might be kind of new that you've already heard, but we'll do a quick sort of overview. Just generally, the CARES Act, as many of you know, was passed by Congress and is essentially the largest stimulus bill in history, totaling roughly $2 trillion. And of that $2 trillion, there is about $30.75 billion that was specifically designated for educational purposes. And that $30 billion is further broken down, as you can see here, into three main buckets. The first is the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, which is about $3 billion. That is this is sort of the broadest discretionary spending that's being offered as part of this overall Education Stabilization Fund. And that's going to governors based on a variety of different criteria, and governors have a lot of flexibility in how they choose to spend it. So how that money is, how you can access that money and how that money can be used is going to vary a lot depending on your own particular state. And, like I said, my job is to work with governors to make sure as much of that money as possible is going towards closing the digital divide and really supporting the schools that you all, for the most part, are trying to, help shore up infrastructure for. The second big pool of money is the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, which is about $14.25 billion for institutes of higher education. A lot of that money is sort of pre-designated for student relief, and again, the usage of that kind of varies by, from university to university. Some universities have opted to just give all the money they receive directly to the students to deal with student loans, to deal with living expenses, housing expenses, things like that. So not a lot of guidance, and also not a lot of, most of that all of that is more or less formula funding that's sort of predetermined, which institutions get which amounts of money off of that. But then the biggest bucket we wanted to talk about today, and which I think the majority of you are most interested in also, is the elementary and secondary school emergency relief, which is about $13.5 billion for K through 12 to help schools respond to coronavirus. I think the most important thing to keep in mind here is when it comes to this bucket of money, there actually aren't a lot of guidelines that were either in the CARES Act itself in the legislation or in terms of guidance provided by the U.S. Department of Education. There's a lot of flexibility in how to use this money. And we have here a couple of quotes. For example, the Department of Education sent a letter out, and they said basically encourage schools to use these funds for remote learning, to make strategic investments that promote student achievement through long-term improvements in infrastructure and operations so that students may receive educational services whether or not school campuses are open or closed. So while there's no amount of this money that's specifically designated towards technology needs, it's definitely strongly encouraged that some of this money be used by schools for that purpose. Same with, Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos herself. She wrote a letter where she first said it's not the job of the federal government or even the state government to micromanage how schools use this money, but at the same time, she strongly encouraged that the unprecedented disruption that we're seeing be used as an opportunity to rethink the way that students access education. And then the bottom line is these funds can absolutely be used to purchase educational technology for students that aid kind of a regular and substantive educational interaction between students and instructors. A couple of questions that I think have already come up that I see on the side here that Dan and others can maybe go into a little bit more. One of the questions that comes up is, are there any special instructions for how institutions procure goods through the CARES Act? And the short answer is, again, the CARES Act doesn't actually specify any special procurement instructions or procurement vehicles, which means it's kind of left up to both the independent schools and school districts, and then also the state to determine how exactly to set that up. And there's another part of this that I think Dan can go into, later on in the presentation, is how CARES Act funds relate to E-rate. For the most part, there's no direct connection, or at least there's none that's sort of outlined in the legislation. There's a lot. Well, what I would say is there's a lot more flexibility with the CARES Act funds than there is with E-rate funding, in terms of restrictions, in terms of procurement vehicles. The CARES Act money that you would receive is outside the scope of the normal E-rate process. So I'll stop there, and I think to sort of tee up the next part of this, the CARES Act obviously so far has been the largest stimulus package that Congress has approved. However, we fully expect there to be at least another, if not 2 or 3 more rounds of federal funding, and it's happening right now in Congress. So to talk about and sort of to give just a brief overview of potential future streams of federal funding that are coming down the pike, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Brett Wincup, who leads federal government affairs for HPE. So Brett, I'm going to turn it over to you right now.
Thanks. Thank you, Zeki. Appreciate it. Hey, everyone. So Brett Wincup on the federal affairs team for Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Good to be with you all. I just wanted to give a quick snapshot, a view from Washington, D.C. on some of the current conversations going forward. There's clearly a lot of momentum around helping solve the connectivity gap, and Congress is prepared to spend again to address the need. You may have seen that the House Democrats are set to pass their proposal tomorrow, calling for an additional $3 trillion more in spending to support states, local governments, individuals. Within the House Democratic bill, there is $100 billion set aside for schools, and of which $5 billion will be authorized to authorized for internet service and providing modems, routers, Wi-Fi hotspots, connected devices. This will be a 2-year fund that would be dispersed and administered through the FCC's E-rate program. This is just a first step, and it's a marker being put out by the Democrats, so we're still waiting to see what the Senate will do. However, there is a lot of momentum to connect students and generally fund broadband build-out. Senate Majority Leader has said he doesn't have immediate plans to pass another large stimulus bill yet. They're preferring to wait and see how the current funding is being used before making plans for another round of stimulus funding. So to that end, all this information you're giving us through the polls and otherwise, if you can share with us information letting us know how accessible the funding has been for schools, what you're seeing, the spending on technology for needs and also needs not being met. This would really help us relate it to Congress so they understand how dire the need is for more funding to support distance learning. On the Democratic side in the Senate, they are closely aligned with the House Democratic efforts. All the momentum is focused on channeling the education technology money through E-rate in a way to not make permanent changes to the fund. They don't want to impact the contribution factor. They're just rather going directly to emergency fund to address the immediate needs using the E-rate rules. As I said, additional funds for distance learning seem inevitable as current school year is coming to an end. Reality of next school year, also relying on some form of distance learning becomes more of a reality. As normal in Congress, things change rapidly depending on circumstances in the states. We're not expecting another round of federal funds to pass before mid-June. So here at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Aruba, we'll continue working with the education groups, industry stakeholders. We'll keep educating lawmakers and staff about the need for increased and flexible use of the funds to ensure your school districts can purchase the type of connectivity equipment that's needed locally. So the more information you can provide us would be helpful to then in turn advocate for needs. So there's a quick snapshot of the current landscape in DC. Dan, back to you on Aruba Solutions.
Excellent, thank you. And certainly, as Brett said, we would love to get your input and feedback too, so we know, really how to position what is important and what is needed within the schools. So that's a great lead-in. We're going to launch another poll just to talk about, have you or has your school or your local educational agency or school district, higher ed institution started to already receive funding from the CARES Act? So we'll launch that poll there, give you a few minutes here to answer that. But in short, has the money started to flow? I know that we've talked with a few higher education institutions who has already started to receive their funding through Title IV grant allocations. We know that the Department of Education and Nancy DeVos, I think it was a week ago, Zeki, a week and a half ago, announced the Title I disbursement allocation for each state and how they would be tying that to the Title I allocation for each LEA within the state. So we do see some of those states starting to open up with the funding, but it would be good to know, has your school, your organization, institution already started to receive some of those funds? And if not, the good news is within this webinar we are going to have some additional information as far as the attachments go, which will give you some real next step, right? It'll give you some good information to take within your own organization to talk to them and say, look, if we've received this much funding through our Title I or Title IV distribution, here's what we need in technology, here's why we need it, and here's some supporting documentation, not only from a technology group, but also from the FCC or from the Department of Education, encouraging schools to utilize this funding, specifically the education funding to support distance learning, remote learning, which is going to put a huge requirement on the IT group. So we'll go ahead and start talking about some of the solutions, right? As we look to, we know that there is the need. So taking a look at what is Aruba doing to address some of these solutions. Let's take a review on that. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And if you want to take just a quick minute, Anthony, looks like the wide majority has not received their funding.
The no's have it, 75% to 25%. This is fantastic to see the responses coming in. Some of the webinars we do, let's be honest, maybe the engagement isn't there, or maybe the poll questions aren't questions that are resonating. We're getting a lot of people responding to these poll questions. So yeah, 76% no, 23% yes on the question, has your school or district received funding from the CARES Act? So thanks for the responses to the poll, and thanks for asking your questions. We're into double digits on the questions, and we'll be hitting those near the end of the presentation. So keep them coming. Click that Ask a Question tab underneath your slide window, submit your question, and we'll answer it in the order we got it.
Absolutely, and I will say, Zeki, Zeki has done a great job and really highlight, putting together some information on a state-by-state basis, and we've actually been able to put together some calculators that would talk about your individual LEA. So if you want to find out how much is available to your specific local educational agency, you can reach out to us. And I know it's still talking about, about the entire fund in general, but you can reach out to us at erate@hvu.com, and we can go ahead and give you back some estimated amounts and calculations on that. So feel free to reach out to us, and then, as I said before, we will have an attachment that tells you what your state allocation has been, and then help you to be able to break down to your specific local education agency. So with that, let's take a look into how you can address some of these challenges, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about what Aruba can do to assist with ensuring secure access for your teachers, your students, and your administrators as they're working from home. So whether it's offering free Wi-Fi at your district or university parking lot, or whether you want to implement remote access points for individuals that are working from home, let's take a look at some of those Aruba solutions that you can take advantage of. So when it comes to that parking lot solution, we have the ability to hang an outdoor access point onto a multi-purpose room or gymnasium, again using directional antennas to be able to put it out towards publicly accessible areas where those where the parents and students can drive up and access the internet, again, staying very safely in their car. We can also offer some of this mobile Wi-Fi, and in fact, we have seen some states. We've actually worked within the state of California, specifically the city of Sacramento, and a few other cities to offer mobile Wi-Fi. And this is where we've actually taken a city bus and have been able to retrofit it with some access points tied back to LTE modems, offering this mobile Wi-Fi for a community. And we, with the municipalities, have set up schedules where that school bus would go into certain areas of the community between 8 to 12 or 1 to 4, going through offering that school Wi-Fi as well. And then, of course, we have some solutions to be offered at home, which is above and beyond what would traditionally be a mobile hotspot, right, or that MiFi. Because quite frankly, whether it's different industry publications like CNET or ZDNet or others, we know that those mobile hotspots can be hacked. So how do you offer remote connectivity that's secure, that's safe, and reliable? Aruba has a great product line of what we call remote access points, where you can issue these out directly to the students, and they offer zero-touch deployment, where they set it up in the student's home, literally just plug it into power, utilizing the access point with an attached USB modem. They can connect to the internet, download all of the district specifications to that access point, and start broadcasting immediately the school district SSID for those users in the home. So now you're offering that school internet, that school network connectivity in a safe, secure, and reliable way to those students in the home. So all the traffic is tunneled, the content is filtered, so you'll meet all your requirements, whether it be SIPA or COPPA or FERPA or any of the other federal requirements as well. So some great solutions. We're going to have some of these solutions also attached, but I want to make sure that we save some time because I know we do have a lot of questions. I want to get to the questions, but as I said, we do have a lot of the resources. I do want to let you know we do have an at-a-glance document that's attached to this, which specifically addresses how to be able to continue learning in this new way of learning through this distance and remote learning. We've also done some additional webinars getting more technical, right, in a more technical format on how to implement distance learning, whether it's for K-12 or higher ed. And then one thing I wanted to also mention is within Aruba, we have what's called the Airheads community. And this is a community of airheads, what we call airheads. These are Aruba engineers, whether they're Aruba badged or partner badged or customer badged, right? These are just people who are passionate about technology, and they've signed up to be part of a community. I think we have over 150,000 community members, or maybe more now. And we have introduced what we call our Airheads Volunteer Corps. So we launched it as part of a Healthcare Connect initiative, and we've expanded that into education initiative. So you can connect onto Airheads, and if you're having some challenges with supporting distance learning or supporting this new transformation to digital learning, you can jump into the Airheads community, reach out, and we have a whole core of volunteers who can come out and help you install access points for the outdoors or help configure your network to allow this community use so that it doesn't negatively impact or make your network not secure. It doesn't make it vulnerable. So definitely check out our Airheads community. You can see the link there to register to the community. And then also we have the different funding. We didn't have an opportunity to talk much about E-Rate, but we have a great E-Rate website through our Aruba Networks K-12 education website. You'll see an E-Rate link. If you have any questions about that, you can email us at erate@hb.com. But let's get to our last poll question, then we'll get into Q&A. Is that a deal, Anthony?
Absolutely a deal. We're over 20 questions, so let's get that poll in, get a sense for how they're using the funding, and then we'll get to the questions.
Okay. Excellent. So the poll is launched, and it's just, where are you planning to allocate your CARES Act funding, or what's the highest priority? And certainly, as Zeki said, there's a lot of flexibility that's been given to the local educational agencies on how they spend their CARES Act funding, whether it's in teacher salaries or staff, administrative salaries, faculty. Is it technology support, connectivity? Is it that professional development, helping the faculty instruction to adapt on how to manage technology, how to start utilizing the technology to extend that remote and distance learning. We've also seen, as we go through this, I know State of Maryland has put out some initiative plans that give some pretty startling statistics with a high percentage of students that just have no internet at home. We know that there was another, I believe it was State of Ohio, just announced that they were planning on cutting $300 million from the next school year's budget. So certainly a lot of good or necessary needs to spend the CARES Act funding, but looks like I think we'll close it out here, and looks like live results here. Technology is the highest priority, followed, not surprisingly, right, by connectivity and of course salaries. So as Anthony said previously, thank you so much for voting and just for responding to that poll. And now let's go ahead and get to your questions. So Anthony, I'll turn it back over to you, and maybe there's some questions we can get to.
Yeah, and again, we don't pretend to know the answers to every question. So in the event that we need to do some research on our end to get or the presenters need to do some research on their end to find the right answer, I will get that answer to you using the email address you used to register to watch today. So with that said, here's the first one. Since it seems like emergency E-rate funds will be approved either way, do we have any information on what that will look like? I don't know.
Okay, great. If
jump in, whoever wants it, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I would love to answer that question. So, and again, this is Dan. The way we're seeing what's happening with the E-rate, there's actually been some really good positive news very recently with an E-rate. So last Friday, we just saw the, we saw the conclusion of the funding year 2020 competitive bid season and the close of the application window on April 29th. And last Friday, we actually saw not only the quickest funding wave for that first year funding wave, meaning the time between the close of the application window to the issuing of the first wave one, but we also saw the largest single wave ever as well. So USAC and specifically their new subcontractor Maximus has done an incredible job this year of processing those E-rate funding year 2020 requests. So the good news is we are seeing a lot of funding come out, and they're absolutely trying to get it out as quickly as possible so that schools can really ready their networks, because as we all know, moving to digital learning, whether it be digital learning on campus or digital learning remotely, all comes back to technology. So being able to take advantage of the E-rate funds and upgrade the networks to ready the networks to support digital learning on and off campus is essential. So it's great to see that that USAC has been pushing that out. We anticipate another large funding wave to come very, very soon. They traditionally do that once every Friday. And the good news is, and this would be something I would encourage you to talk to if you're K-12, talk to your superintendent, talk to your Title I grant coordinator to say, let's use the CARES Act funding as our match for that E-rate funding. Because what that allows you to do, it allows you to maximize that CARES Act funding by multiplying it, by using it to pay as a match for your E-rate funding. As far as the other emergency funding that Brett mentioned in some of the bills, we do anticipate there will be additional funding. Brett, I know we can't. It's not Las Vegas, so we can't put odds on it. But that being said, how likely do you think that we will see some additional funding specifically to support Wi-Fi at the home, whether it's a mobile Wi-Fi hotspot or other connected devices in the students' homes this year?
So I think it's very likely. I think given the unusual circumstances that we're in, it's also coming up on an election. I think a lot of things are playing into the fact that a lot of different, all the lawmakers see huge gaps in connectivity for students, for teleworkers, for telehealth, kind of down the line. And so I think it's very likely some form of money will be allocated. The conversation in Congress right now is it gets in the weeds about, do you put the money as a separate emergency fund in E-rate, or do you do it separate from E-rate, but sort of use some of the E-rate rules? So that's what they're working out right now. I think the Republicans are more towards the camp of a separate fund. Democrats, like I said, are all, there's a lot of momentum of pushing the money in through E-rate because it's already an established program that's familiar to you all. So those are some of the things they're working out. But at the end of the day, I think it's very likely that we'll see another sizable round of funding for connectivity for students.
Excellent. Thank you. Anthony, next question.
Yeah, next question. This person writes, SSID at home is great. Does Aruba have a network access control NAC or equivalent to prevent the bad guys on getting in?
I think that question was asked by an Aruba person, right? I kid. It is, yes. We have a great network, what we call a NAC, right? We have a great NAC. It is called Aruba ClearPass. and it is essential in helping to keep the bad guys out and only letting the good guys in. You can certainly find out more information on that through the Aruba Network's website.
Yeah. I can't see who's asking the questions. Only afterward I can check. So I'm just going to get to them all. Here's one. Can individual schools apply for CARES funds, or is it states only?
Zeki, do you want to address that? Because I know the CARES Act sets up the grant system for the states to apply, but then it's up to the states to set up a sub-grant program, right?
Yeah, so I mean, that's, not to be evasive, but the answer to a lot of these questions are it's really going to depend on the state. But for the most part, that's what's happening is the bulk of this funding goes to the states first, and it's up to those states to create their own guidelines for how individual schools and school districts can apply. So there's a couple of good resources that are out there that kind of break down how different states are addressing this. But to going back to Dan's point, if you want us, we're happy to kind of help navigate that to the extent that we can be helpful in figuring out what exactly your particular state or your particular situation is, to figure out what exactly the process is to get to apply for that money. But short answer is it's going to depend on the state to decide what guidelines they put up.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Let's see. Where can we get more information on getting a Spectrum license? Is that appropriate? is that
I'm not
answerable?
sure. I think, and Brett, are they referring to some of the FCC action there, or that may not be part of this program here?
Yeah. So it's probably around the action the FCC took to make more spectrum available just in the time of this crisis. So I would go look at the FCC for resources on that. We can look into that if you like, but I think it's the FCC is going to be the one. They control the access to and licenses on spectrum, so that's the first place I would start.
Yeah, check with the FCC.
There we go. That's
okay.
FCC.gov. All right.
Yeah, there you go. Here's one, and this was just a request for the email address to find out how much money the local LEA has received. Did you mention an email address, Dan, or Zeki, or
yeah, so right now you can email erate@hp.com. We'll go ahead and respond back to you. Just let us know what your local agency, your LEA ID is and we can respond back and tell you what the Title I allocation percentage would be and what the CARES Act funding would be based on a percentage of what the state is getting. So if you email us at erate@hp.com, we'll be able to get that information back to you.
Yeah, and just I want to make a note here. Is it erate@hpe.com?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure. So thanks for that question. Here's another one. This is more of I think the solution side. What is the connection radius? When you talked about some of the technology that's being used, I think that is in response. That question was in response to what you were sharing there.
Certainly, and so it kind of depends on which solution. When we talk about the outdoor Wi-Fi, kind of the drive-up solution, where it's parking lot Wi-Fi, we'd recommend in reality about 300 to 600 feet, depending. You make sure there's no obstructions in the way and good connectivity. If it's talking about some of the school bus outdoor Wi-Fi, you're looking at about the same distance. However, realistically, if a school bus pulls up in front of a large multifamily unit housing, it's going to be pretty difficult for people inside the home to see that network connection. So they're going to have to come out to where there's again, 300, maybe 600 feet unobstructed, assuming there's no bodies of water or trees or other construction material blocking the way. So I would give that as a rough estimate as far as the radius goes. And of course, in the home with the wraps, it's the traditional same you'd see. It is enterprise grade wireless access points, so it'll go through interior walls no problem. But outdoor stuff about 300, 600 feet.
Yeah, okay. Here's one. My school applied for a PPP loan. Can we also take advantage of other CARES Act funding meant for schools?
So if I can, and I turn to Zaki on this, that would lead me to believe they probably are a private school or a charter school. And if my understanding is correct, they would qualify for CARES Act. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
For the education funding within CARES Act specifically? Sorry.
That's correct. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
That's correct. As I said, sorry, just to expand briefly on that, as I said, there's a lot of flexibility in how the CARES Act funding can be used. It specifically can be used by charter and private schools. One of the only restrictions that you'd have to get a waiver for is, I mean, the general rule of thumb is if you can sort of justify how your application for this funding is specifically going to be used for COVID-19 related issues, then you're more or less in the clear. If you're using it to sort of pay for existing debt or offsetting, revenue shortfalls, et cetera, then it becomes a little bit harder to justify. But as a general rule of thumb, if you can make some connection to how you're specifically going to use this money for COVID-related stuff, then you are generally going to be in the clear.
Okay. Thank you. Here's one. Is the extension of internet to community already approved by SLD? Are we still required to cost allocate that percentage?
Okay, great question. And so the short story is yes, the FCC has released some orders, and if we have who sent that question, I'll be able to send direct orders. So I'll get you those direct orders from the FCC. There were two related orders. One was community use, and the second was the gift order. So I'll go ahead and send those to you directly, and it details how to offer that community use without having to do a cost allocation. And there are specific dates that it runs through. So we'll get that information back to you. But yeah, they offer direct and clear guidance on how to offer that without doing any kind of cost allocation.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Dan. I don't know if this has been answered already. Forgive me if it has. The question is, can these funds be used to support hardware, software, and connectivity for educators as well?
Yes. So, Zeki would say, it's very, very flexible. So as long as it has to deal with the response of COVID and specifically within education, supporting distance remote learning and the impact that COVID has had on the local school, I would say yes. Zeki, any other information?
No, I think that's correct. I think that's right.
Okay, perfect. Here's one. Is money for elementary and secondary schools being dispersed currently, or will it take some time for that to happen? Will we need to apply for grants for this money? Any specifics would be great.
Yeah, so to go back to my earlier point, and again, I'm not trying to be evasive, but it totally depends on the state. Some states we are hearing have already started moving the money out to LEAs. Some states are still in the process of setting up the framework for school districts to be able to apply for it. But to the second part of the question, yes, you would have to apply to your state, and it's going to depend again on whatever framework they set up for you to be able to apply. But generally, they're sort of mandated to preserve that flexibility and the spirit of flexibility by which the funding was originally intended. It's just the specifics of how you actually apply for it is going to vary from state to state.
Okay, so perfect. And I think this might be along the same lines, a question of how does money get allocated to local entities from the state level? Is it based on need or some other metric? Do you have any insight on that?
So this is a combination, and I think Dan also has done some number crunching on this too. There is a metric which is, and I think Dan also alluded to this earlier, Title I formula funding is being used as the metric to determine kind of the ballpark of what school districts can compete for. And so if you all are familiar with that, just take a look at the FY19 Title I funding allocations. school district by school district, and this is something, it's publicly available, but if you want to get in touch with us, we can send you a copy of that, just to get a sense of the proportionality of how much school districts can ask for. So there is that formula. There are some sort of guidelines that are being used by states when it comes to figuring out the maximum that districts can apply for. But it's not the only metric being used. It's sort of a combination of different formulas of both need-based and then also Title I formula funding.
Okay, thank you. And some of these, keep in mind, folks maybe joined, if they may have joined after that part was covered. So this may be a review for some of you on the webinar, but for others, it's the first time they're hearing it. So we appreciate your patience there. For underserved students who may not have home internet, how does the CARES Act provide funds to allow them to get home internet, or do they?
Zeki, do you want to take that, or Brett, or would you like me to answer that?
I think it's all you. I think this is definitely the bulk of what you've talked about is exactly answering this question.
Okay, excellent. So yes, it does. The CARES Act will provide funding to allow students, underserved students, to get home connectivity. Specifically, it will pay for, you can utilize that money to pay for subscription costs to provide, whether it's wired, fixed internet, fixed broadband internet, or mobile broadband internet. It'll pay for devices that you can place in the home, whether it's Wi-Fi access points, like the remote access point that we talked about earlier. It'll also allow you to pay for things like connected devices, to where if you needed to supplement any one-to-one initiatives that you may have in your districts, you can also provide those types of connected devices as well. So there is, as Zeki said, a lot of flexibility within the funding within CARES Act for the funding usage.
Sure.
I'll just add too,
okay.
Dan. I'll just add, this is Brett. That is a major focus, right? A lot of people are talking about the numbers of students that are not connected, both K-12, but then also the higher ed students who are returning home and don't have connection. So that's a topic of a lot of conversation, and that is going to be factored into the next round of funding, partly for the education and that $5 billion carve-out I mentioned, but also a potential broader fund to go towards broadband build-out.
Sure. Okay. We just have a few questions left, and then we'll wrap up. If a district has used local funds to provide connectivity to students, will this fund reimburse it? If so, how does a district seek reimbursement?
That is a fantastic question. Zeki, I'm not sure, right? I would say, is that within their own internal district as far as the allocation of their budgets?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't want to speak with too much confidence, other than to say that, just once again, that I think there's a lot of flexibility for how CARES Act funds can be used. But I think it would depend on kind of what the district says and how you're able to package that into a request to the state. You'd have to make the case that basically the loan that you're seeking reimbursement for was directly connected to your schools or your district's response to COVID-19. So I think it's definitely possible, but I don't know the specific logistics of how you would go about doing that.
Maybe that's one we can follow up on with the person who asked that one. So thank you for the question. Here's one. Is there any type of MiFi available through Aruba with an M? And is MiFi E-ratable?
So I'll go ahead and take that question. We'll start with the first part. As far as the MiFi connectivity, this would be our remote access point solution with an attached USB modem. So all providers will offer some kind of USB modem, a 4G LTE modem that can plug into the USB port on any Aruba access point. However, it would still require AC power. So it wouldn't be a true mobile broadband MiFi kind of a hotspot, but it would be an Aruba access point that could connect to a mobile broadband internet provider or a wired broadband internet provider. It just wouldn't be in that MiFi type of format. As far as is MiFi E-rate eligible, under the current rules of the E-rate program, it is not. However, as Brett had mentioned, there are a couple of bills within Congress right now, the two bills proposed by in the Senate. There's a bill that's been proposed in the House that do offer E-rate funds to pay for connectivity at home. So would that include a MiFi router or a MiFi type of product? I would say yes, but it currently does not. So it will take an act of Congress to make it eligible.
Right. Okay. Hey, Dan, if maybe if we could give each of you, 30 seconds to kind of give us your thoughts or next steps for those who are on. We did get a question about someone who was wondering if they can have an attendance certificate. I do believe the Bright Talk platform provides that. If you don't receive one, please go back in on demand and ask a question of how you can get it. I'll research it as well. And then the other one was, we don't just have K-12 and higher ed businesses or entities on the line. We also have some partners and potentially some of our competitors watching as well. So one of the questions was, can we get a quick sheet to help the K-12 customers find out how to receive funds, how much they can get, and how to access those funds? So I will respond to both of those questions directly after the webinar. But Dan, Brett, and Zeki, maybe 30 seconds each to kind of close it out, and then we'll let everyone go.
Certainly. Well, I'll kick it off just by saying again, thank you everyone for your time and for your efforts, because one thing, I've been in this industry since 1989, and I know the amount of stress and the amount of really importance that IT plays the role in any organization, but I know specifically within education, IT plays such a significant role. And I know that ever since things were starting to, quote, go IP, whether it was IP telephony to IP-based video surveillance and now digital learning, all of this has been continued to be pushed onto the IT department within schools. So I just want to say, thank you, because I know that's a lot of things being put onto you and your staff, and I just appreciate all the hard work that you're doing, not only to support all of this transition into the IP world, but specifically now, as we go through this pandemic, we all have into our own families and friends, but I appreciate your efforts working within the schools to keep education going and to be able to take on this immediate action and respond in ways that just quite frankly blow me away, and being able to support a radical transition in a very short amount of time. So I just want to say thank you to all of you who are in the IT departments at higher ed and K-12 institutions. It really, thank you very much for all the hard work you're doing. And I'll turn it over to Brett. I'll let you take it from here.
Sure.
Yeah, about 30
quick,
seconds,
I just want to reiterate the request for information. Lawmakers are clamoring for it. They want to know how the funds are being used, how they're not being used. If you can reach out to your local politicians, your federal politicians, or us, and let us know, we can relay information. So any of that is very helpful. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah. Zeki?
Yeah, just to echo, thank you guys so much for joining. Like Brett, my main job is to work with states and local governments to ensure that proper investment is being made in closing the digital divide. So as Brett said, hearing stories directly from you about what your needs are, and also from a policy perspective, what's working, what isn't working, that's all very helpful to us as a technology company, because we're trying to position ourselves not just as a vendor, but as a true thought leader and partner when it comes to, mapping out policy decisions that really help strengthen states and cities and schools' ability to deliver, innovative solutions and quality learning for students. So absolutely stay in touch if you want to. Let us know how we can be helpful from a government affairs perspective in advocating on your behalf, both at the state level and beyond.
Yeah, fantastic. And we've received questions and requests. Please let me put me on that list to help me understand how to get these funds. And I'm seeing some email addresses come in as well. So I appreciate it. Want to remind you real quick that as you close out here, you're going to be prompted to give some feedback. Please let us know what you felt about today's webinar on a 1 to 5 star scale, as well as any comments. I've seen some feedback coming through already, so we appreciate that. And if you're interested in some of our past K-12 education content, and I think our last most recent was just a few weeks ago, you can go to the arubanetworks.com homepage, scroll to the bottom, click on the webinars tab, and you'll see all of our webinars there. I want to thank Dan, Zeki, and Brett. We also want to thank you for attending. I know there are a lot of webinars out there, and you can see many of them all in one day if you want, but we appreciate your taking the time to attend ours. My name is Anthony. This concludes today's webinar. Until next time, have a great day.